Hello, Austin, Texas. My name is Adam Sparks, and I am with AISD for All. We aim to be a voice for equitable education and social justice in the Austin Independent School District. We aim to do that through amplifying the voices of educators, teachers, parents, and students through a series of community interviews. Today, I'm very excited to have Candace Hunter with us to talk about the work that she does with students in AISD. Candace, if you would introduce yourself and tell us your story growing up in AISD.
Thank you so much for having me. Again, my name is Candace Hunter, and I am the founder and facilitator of Teacher Bootcamp, an educational company. I work with teachers in Title I schools working on systems and procedures to affect better classroom management and teacher retention. I grew up in Austin ISD, like many children of poverty, going to many different schools. Eventually, my parents just became really frustrated with the system. And unfortunately, in the 10th grade, we then moved to Round Rock ISD, where I finished at Westwood High School.
So you began teaching in the classroom, and then you eventually shifted to working to coach teachers. Can you tell us a little bit about what you learned when you were in the classroom yourself, and then why it felt important to you to give teachers tools that they might not otherwise have?
Yes, I began teaching in the late 90s. And so for me, there was always the older teacher down the hall that I could stick my head out and ask questions to and say, hey, I'm not real sure about this or what have you. I think when I started teaching, the shortest time besides a brand new teacher, the next teacher would have been like 5 years, the next teacher would have been like 10 years. That's no longer the case. And as I began teaching in high school, and then I moved down to middle school, I noticed that the teaching span for teachers began to be shorter. And so like I became the expert teacher at 3 years. How is that possible? And I just always was kind of the teacher that people would stick their head down the hall and ask questions. Well, when my son was in the 8th grade, I decided because he's on the spectrum, I needed to give more time to his education. I stepped out of teaching in 2015. But that didn't last long. Principals heard and administrators heard, hey, I hear you're not teaching anymore. Can you come tutor these teachers? Can you come work with these teachers? And it just occurred to me that that could be a business. And so that's exactly what I did. I thought, what better way to continue to support students than by making sure that their teachers are prepared for them? And so that's the whole purpose of Teacher Bootcamp, is to help students by preparing teachers. Our tagline is skills for teachers, success for students.
Teacher experience is obviously incredibly important. Trying to corral, a whole classroom of students, your first year versus your 30th year in the district. But there is an experience gap, or maybe you can speak to the experience gap in teacher experience between wealthy schools in the Austin Independent School District and Title I schools, those with a larger number of economically disadvantaged students. Can you talk about the experience gap for teachers and let's start with that.
Okay, well, honestly, you have to just think about it like any job. If there's a job where you're being appreciated and you're being supported and you have all of the tools you need, and then you have a great support system, that's not a place you're going to quit working. So you're going to see teachers remain in those school districts. And then if you think about a Title I school where maybe you do have like financial support, but you don't have the staffing to support you. Everybody's got 4 different jobs. You're not going to have that support. Plus, you may not have the parent support. Not to say that Title I schools don't have parent supports, because a lot of neighborhood schools and community schools really do have a strong parent base, but that is not so for all schools. So now you're having to do way more than you had imagined doing. That's going to wear on you over time. And so you're going to tend to quit. And that's how we get that teacher turnover rate. It's like, why would I work here and make the same amount of money doing the same thing across town? So that leaves our children in those areas at a disadvantage. So the first thing is that the reason we see that, I guess, the longevity of teachers in more affluent schools is the support, right? If I need paper, then all I have to do is go to the PTA. At some schools, teachers are getting $100, $200 stipends for supplies. At a Title I school, that teacher may be having to go into their own pockets. You can only sustain that for so long. And teachers are not, they don't live by themselves a lot of times. They have families, they have kids, and you're going to put in more time in a Title I school than you just are in a school that doesn't have as many challenges.
So when you do your teacher boot camp, let's imagine a teacher who's straight out of getting their education degree in college. They're 22, they're 23 years old, and they're going into a Title I school. What do you help them learn? What do they need to succeed, hit the ground running?
Excellent question. So I think I want to kind of rewind and start with the idea that teachers are going to teacher colleges and they're learning. They're not. A lot of the teachers that I deal with are alt certification. Nothing to be said bad about alt certification. They're meant to certify teachers rapidly. So if I'm normally, like I went through a teacher program, that meant I spent 4 years learning how to be a teacher. I mean, literally how to put a bulletin board up, how to use, I probably haven't heard of this in a while, overhead projector, that sort of thing, right? So I'm learning those skills. Alt certification is taking someone that already has a degree and saying, hey, you want to be a teacher, so we're going to compact that down. We're going to truncate it into a really short amount of time. So that means that we're going to leave a lot of things out. So when I'm called into schools, I will tell you that the majority of teachers that I'm working with that are new teachers are not 4-year traditional college educated through an educational program. They're usually alt cert, which means they don't actually have a background in education. Also means they probably have never actually student taught. The first year of their teaching is their student teaching. So what I'm doing for them is to give them the basic foundation. And that is, where do we start? Well, let's start with, how does your physical space going to look? Because people don't think that that's going to be important. But if you put the pencil sharpener behind you, then every time a kid needs to sharpen a pencil, they're going to walk behind you while you're teaching, right? Little simple things like that. How do we pass up a paper? Well, that doesn't seem like a big deal. You're just adding the paper to the person in front of you. Well, if I'm a 6th grader, that can go look a lot of different ways. And it might also cause a disruption if I keep poking the kid in front of me with that paper, right? So there's just those types of things that we go over, what we call systems and procedures. They're not rules. They're, how are we going to sharpen a pencil from this time to this time? How are we going to pack up for the day? We're going to do it this way at this time. How are we going to line up? We're going to stand up. We're going to pick our chair up, push it in, or lift it up so that it doesn't drag on the floor. Those types of things are what we do to give teachers the basics. They already have to learn content. They're going to have gobs of email. They're going to have things that they're required to do for special education students, for 504 students. The last thing that they really want to have to worry about is when I come in, how do I get them quiet? How do I just get them ready to learn? What is my expectation that if we're not quiet, what's going to happen next? So those are the things we try to teach first so that they're ready to do all those really larger things, the real meat of teaching.
That's really interesting. So can you help us then understand, in a Title I school, what percentage of teachers are coming in from a certification like this, and what could be done to prepare them better before they come in? How, do you follow that generally? Like, what could we do to resolve that issue before they hit the classroom and have to learn on the fly?
There isn't a good answer for that. I'm so sorry, I don't have one for you. I think that really smart principals do things like hire me, right? So most schools go back 2 weeks before the children come back, or before the children come to class. And what they'll do is they'll take an extra week for those teachers and they'll give them to me. And then so we get to work on all of those things before, because those alt certification programs, they simply don't have the time to do it. It would make the program longer and more expensive. So they don't do it that way. And then for the principals that call me in, what they're saying is, hey, this is a new teacher. Not only am I teaching them systems, I'm also teaching them some AISD, kind of like, this is how we do it in AISD. Because not every teacher I have is brand new. They simply may be a first-year teacher or a second-year teacher that is new to Austin ISD. They've never taught in an urban school district before. And so there's a lot of things that we have to teach them just from our worldview and our biases, right? So we work through that. Like, so at your last school, this may have been acceptable, but we don't do that here because here is the reason why.
Can you help explain to people what cultural competent education means, cultural competency in teaching?
So I will tell you that we stole that from the medical field. So that's where it comes from. Nurses, and you still see a lot of it when it comes to mortality of Black mothers. nurses were treating patients differently, and they realized I'm making some assumptions based on that person's culture, not having spoken with them, but just making assumptions. So we said the same applies in education. We all have our worldview, right? If you're raised in poverty and you become a teacher, sometimes you begin to live more of a middle-class life. And so now you're thrown into a classroom, or let's say you never lived in poverty, you've always been middle-class or affluent. And now you're thrown into a school where the majority of children are living in poverty or are children of color. And if you don't have an experience, then you just teach what you know, right? And for myself, I will say that I went to a school that had a very Eurocentric way of training teachers, so that I had to unlearn all of that. Even being an African American, I had to unlearn all of that. So cultural competency basically means I look at my worldview, I look at how the students live, and then I try to take everything that I'm learning and view it from their lens, everything that I'm teaching and view it from their lens, right? And that was really challenging for me as a teacher, because I always taught US history from 1492 to 1876. So there's a lot of hard work trying to be culturally competent when kids don't see a lot of themselves reflected in the history.
Let's talk about Title I schools, because it's trying to address the issues that affect schools with a large percentage of low economically advantaged students. It's often said that schools may get the same amount of resources, but how could the same amount of resources play out differently in a Title I school than a more affluent school? Help people who haven't thought through this concept before, how the same amount of resources can bring different outcomes in a Title I school versus a non-Title I school.
Okay, so the history teacher in me comes out a little bit more. So we moved in the United States history from separate but equal to equal. Equal is not good enough. And so what you're describing, the same amount of resources, is equality. And that's not what we need. What we need is equity. So I'll give you the example. Let's say I teach at school A, and school A is very affluent, has an effective PTA. They raise $50,000+ a year. So as a teacher, I have everything I need. Those students are coming to me ready to read. Only a few of them are special education 504, but we have the resources to handle them. Take the same school across town, school B. Those resources will not be good enough, because now not only do I have children who may be special ed or 504, I have children who may be homeless, who live in an abusive family, who may be in foster care, who may have parents who are drug addicted. Not that that doesn't happen in an affluent school, right? It just plays out differently. And so then if I go to my math department and I have 5 math teachers and 1 instructional coach, at school A, that may work perfectly well. But at school B, what I may need is an instructional coach at 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade, where most schools only get 1 math coach. But honestly, at a school that's Title I, I actually need 1 for each grade level, because it's just too much work for 1 person, right? So the same resource is great. Everybody has 1 math coach, 1 English coach, and that's just a person that's like the head teacher who kind of gives them instruction, like how to better teach, kind of what I do, but on a daily basis. But 1 school has 1 of those and it works out well, where the other school would need 3. So think about that for the 4 core: English, science, math, and social studies. At 1 school, that's 4 people, okay? At another school, that's 16 people. That's 16 people on salary, right? Most schools will not do that. Most districts will not get that. I mean, most schools won't get that, and most districts won't do that. So then we have these people operating with really less resources, even though it appears to be the same.
What's one specific thing that AISD can do to ensure an equitable education for all students in Austin, Texas?
I think it has to be a case-by-case basis. We can't look at the district and say, okay, here's the big broad brush, and now we've made everybody the same. Because again, that's equality. We have to look at school A and say, you know what? They really have this under control, but they really struggle here. Let's give them more of that. Oh, wow, school B, they're missing parts 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we're going to give them all of that. School C, they could use part 4 more, part 2 more, right? That's what has to happen. It has to be on a campus by campus basis. And that takes a lot of staff, and it takes a lot of work. And as a district, we don't want to do that. We simply want to say, we'll give you what you need. Here's some money. Try to stretch it and make happen what can happen. And that doesn't work. We see that that doesn't work, right?
And thinking about the AISD as an organization and the school board trustees at the top who are guiding things, what's one thing that you would want every AISD trustee to know and understand?
I guess the one thing I would want them to understand is the title. You are a trustee, right? You have been placed in charge of the well-being and welfare, care, and concern for these children and their parents by default. So the decisions that you don't make them for this zip code. You don't make them for this neighborhood. You are set to represent that neighborhood. You're set to represent that district, but you have to make a decision. How does this affect every child? So if I just make decisions as a trustee, oh, only my district gets exactly what they need because that's all I've been signed up to do, then you're a politician, you're not a trustee. And a trustee should be there for all.
Well, Candace, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us today. I appreciate it, and thank you for the work that you're doing in AISD. If you like this video, and if you want to see other videos like it, please check a look at our YouTube page to see our full list of video interviews, both clips and full interviews, and like the AISD for All page on Facebook. Thanks for joining us today.